Good morning, everyone. So, for today, we're going to have a discussion in General Biology 2. To be specific, our topic is entitled Lesson number 3 Sex Linkage and Pedigree Analysis. Okay, so before we proceed to our discussion, let's have a quick recap all about our topic last meeting. So, last meeting, we have discussed all about non Mendelian patterns of inheritance. So, in there, nalaman natin na there are other inheritance patterns na kailangan i-follow. Okay, aside from the law of inheritance being proposed by Johann Gregor Mendel. Okay, so aside from the law of dominance, law of independent assortment, and law of segregation, meron pa tayong kailangan sundin na iba pang inheritance patterns. Okay, so, ilan nga lang dyan sa mga inheritance patterns na yan would be the incomplete dominance, polygenic trait, epiphysis, codominance, and multiple alleles. Okay? So, with that, ayun nga, ngayon namang week, magkakaroon tayo ng panibagong discussion all about naman sa sex linkage and pedigree analysis. I hope na naintindihan nyo na yung all about do sa topic natin last meeting kasi somehow magkakakonect na tong topic natin in general biology. Okay? So with that, let's start na our discussion. So for this week, here are the objectives that we need to attain. So at the end of this lesson, you're expected to number 1, explain and analyze the patterns of inheritance. Next is to discuss how to identify the mode of diseases. Okay? Next tayo, we have here a short activity. Okay? So this one is our test yourself. All you need to do is to identify the mode of disease of the following. Choose the letter of your answer. Okay? So we have here different choices such as letter A is autosomal dominant, B autosomal recessive, C is X-linked dominant, D is X-linked recessive, E is Y-linked. Okay, so we do have here also different diseases and syndromes. Okay, so all you need to do is identify the mode of disease ng different syndromes and diseases na to. Okay, so with that, dahil nga hindi tayo mag-meet today, so I'm going to give you the answers. Okay, so number 1, for hemophilia, we have here letter D, X-linked recessive. Okay. Number 2 is Fabry disease. Fabry disease is letter D, X-linked recessive. Okay. Number 3 naman, we have here the Fragile X syndrome. Okay. Fragile X syndrome is X-linked dominant. Number 4, cystic fibrosis is autosomal recessive. Number 5, we have here the Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is autosomal dominant. Number 6 is Marfan syndrome. This one is autosomal dominant as well. Number 7 is Y chromosome infertility. So this one is letter E, Y-linked. And number 8, we have here the vitamin D resistant rickets. So that one is autosomal recessive. Just like our number 9, which is sickle cell anemia, under din siya ng autosomal recessive. Number 10, we have here hypertrichosis tenae oris. Okay, so this one is letter E, Y-linked. Okay, again, number 1, letter D. Number 2, letter D. Number 3 is letter C. Number 4 is letter B. Number 5 is letter A. Number 6 is letter A. Number 7 is letter E. Number 8 and 9 is letter B. Number 10 is letter E. Okay? So, please take note of that kasi later on, we're gonna discuss all about different syndromes and diseases na yan, as well as different mode of diseases. Okay? So, with that, next tayo. Let's proceed now to our discussion. So, we have here the term chromosomes. Okay? So, before we start our discussion all about sex linkage, pedigree, different mode of diseases. So, alamin muna natin kung ano nga ba yung chromosomes. Okay, so chromosomes are thread-like structures located inside the nucleus of animal and plant cells. Okay, always remember that each chromosomes is made up of protein and a single molecule of deoxyribonucleic acid, or the DNA. Okay, so DNA contains the specific instruction that make each type of living creature unique. Okay, so always remember, uh, in humans there are 46 chromosomes. Okay, so the first 23 pair comes from the father, and the other 23 pair comes from the mother. Okay, so ayun nga, always remember that the first 22 pairs is what we call the autosomal chromosome. And the next naman, yung one remaining pair of chromosome, tinatawag naman natin to na sex chromosome. Later on, we're gonna differentiate it, and then we have here, or we're going to discuss in here, the parts of the chromosome. So as you can see in here, always remember that chromosomes contains the blueprint of life, or what we call the DNA. Okay? So aside from that, matatagpuan din natin sa ating chromosomes would be the nucleosomes, and then ang mismong parts ng ating chromosomes would be the P-arm, centromere, Q-arm, and then the telomere. Okay? So, yun nga, magkaroon lang tayo ng konting difference, pagdi-differentiate dito sa ating different part of the chromosomes. Okay, so we remember that P arm is the shorter arm as compared to the Q arm. Next naman, we have here the centromere. Okay, centromere, ito yung involved during the cell division. Okay. And then next naman, we have here the Q arm. Always remember that the Q arm is longer than the P arm. Okay. And then next naman, telomere. This one is the end part of our chromosomes. Okay. So, lahat ng mga parts na yan, syempre, meron niyang ginagampanan or merong specific function. So, wag na natin isa-isahin yun kasi medyo mahaba-haba yung discussion natin for this morning. Okay? Next tayo. We have here, again, the different types of chromosomes. Okay? So, just like what I've said a moment ago, so we have here the autosomal chromosomes and then the sex chromosomes. Okay? So, when we say autosomal chromosome, this is known for regulating all other inheritance of an organism's characteristics. Okay, they are responsible for transferring the genetic information from parents to their offspring. Okay, so with that, ayun nga, aside from having autosomal chromosome as the term, tinatawag din natin tong autosomal chromosome as the non-sex chromosomes. Okay, so always remember that we have in here 22 sets of chromosomes or autosomes, and then yung 22 na yun, nagde-direct siya sa atin ng iba't ibang characteristic traits. Okay, aside from that, dito rin natin nakukuha yung different genetic information na na-inherit from the parents to their offspring. Okay, next naman. We have here the sex chromosomes. Sex chromosomes are chromosomes that play a vital role in determining the gender or sex of humans or other species of animals. They are named as X and Y by the scientists, wherein in female we have here 2 sets of X chromosomes, and in male naman we have here 1 set of X chromosome and the other one is the Y chromosome. Okay, so that is the sex chromosomes in females and males. Okay, so ayun nga lang yung tatandaan na yung sex chromosomes natin is responsible for giving us the gender or the sex. So, ito yung nagde-determine kung magiging babae or lalaki ba yung isang individual. Okay? So, next naman tayo. Are we clear with this one? Okay? So, next naman, we have here the sex linkage. Okay? By definition, sex linkage describes the sex-specific patterns of inheritance and presentation when an allele is present on a sex chromosome, allosome, rather than a non-sex chromosome or the autosome. Okay? So with that, ayun nga, in sex linkage, dito natin pinufocus yung different patterns of inheritance na nangyayari do sa ating tinatawag nating sex chromosome or the allosome. Okay? Rather than a non-sex chromosome or the autosome. Okay? So, ayun nga, although dalawa lang yung ating sex chromosome, still, kinakailangan pa rin natin pag-aralan kasi most of the heritable or yung mga namamanang diseases ay nagmumula dito sa ating uh, sex linkage or dito sa ating X and Y chromosome. Okay? So we have here the term X-linked traits. Okay? So X-linked traits are traits where a gene is located on the X chromosome. Okay? So commonly, mas dominant to sa babae kasi we all know naman na females do have two X chromosome. Okay? Next naman. Next naman, we have here the Y-linked traits. Okay, Y-linked traits, these are the traits where a gene is located on the Y chromosome. So, meaning to say, in Y-linked traits, nagmamanifest lang to, yung mga traits na to, do sa ating males. Kasi nga, we all know naman na males lang ang merong Y chromosome. And then next naman, X-linked genes have distinctive inheritance patterns because they are present in different numbers in females and males. Just like what I mentioned a while ago. So yun nga, X-linked genes uh, have different patterns kasi nga we all know naman na the X chromosome it is present both sa ating females and then sa ating male. Okay? So always remember that in most cases, most of the heritable diseases are sex-linked. Okay? So katulad nga na sinabi ko sa inyo kanina, halos lahat ng namamanang mga sakit ay may kinalaman do sa um, X-linked traits natin and sa Y-linked traits. Okay? So, or meaning to say, yung tatawag nating sex-linked. Okay? So, with that, let's have another discussion. Are we clear na ba with sex linkage? Okay. So, next naman, let's talk about the pedigree. Okay. So, by definition, pedigree is used to analyze the pattern of inheritance of a particular trait throughout the family. Okay. Nire-represent natin yung different family members and relationship using standardized symbol. Okay, so ano kayang meaning na sinabi kong yun? Okay, so always remember na in pedigree, meron tayong iba't ibang patterns of inheritance na dinedetect. Okay, so katulad na nga lang ng mga patterns of inheritance ng different diseases, different syndromes, or di kaya different characteristic traits. Okay? So, next naman, always remember na in pedigree, gumagamit tayo ng iba't ibang standardized symbol such as circle, square, triangle, and then circle with a bracket. Okay? So, with that, para mas maintindihan nyo, I'll be explaining it. Always remember na in pedigree, we do have here 3 generations involved. Okay, so meaning to say, yung pag-detect ng halimbawa na isang syndrome, nagmumula siya do sa first filial generation, which is yung lolo and lola mo. And then next naman, the second filial generation would be the generation of your mother or your father. as well as your tita and tito. Okay? So, next naman, the third generation would be uh, your generation. And then, um, kasama nyo na rin syempre yung mga siblings nyo or yung mga kapatid nyo. Okay? So, yun nga, katulad na sinabi ko kanina, gumagamit tayo ng different standardized symbols. So, ano-ano nga ba yung mga symbols na ginagamit natin? So, for male, we have here square. For female, we have here circle. For affected, we have here shaded circle or shaded square. And the next naman, for miscarriage, we have here triangle. And for adopted, we have here circle or square with bracket. Okay, so that is the standardized symbols we're gonna use or we need to use in the pedigree. Okay, so next tayo. So according to this one, by analyzing a pedigree, we can determine the genotypes, identify the phenotypes, and predict how a trait will be passed on in the future. Okay? The information from a pedigree makes it possible to determine how many certain alleles are inherited, whether they are dominant, recessive, autosomal, or sex-linked. Okay, so according to this one, so pedigree nga, ginagamit natin to in analyzing different syndromes and diseases. Aside from that, ginagamit din natin to in determining what will be the genotype or what will be the phenotype of a specific individual. Okay, so again, when we say genotype, ito yung ginagamit natin mga letters to represent a specific trait. Let's say, for example, homozygous dominant BB or capital BB stands for black hair. Okay? So, next naman, pwede rin naman siyang heterozygous BB wherein we have here the capital letter B and small letter b. That still decodes for black hair. Aside from that, meron din tayong homozygous recessive BB. So that one codes for brown hair. Okay? So meaning to say brown hair is our recessive trait. Okay? So next naman, phenotype naman. So yan nga, phenotype is the specific individual traits. Okay? So just like what I've said, so yun nga, meron tayong phenotypes such as black hair, brown hair, o di kaya round eyes, kinka eyes. For the height naman, we have tall or short. So that is the phenotype. So that is the specific characteristics an individual possess. Okay? Next naman, aside from that, sa pedigree, dito rin natin dinedetect or pinipredict kung ano nga ba or kung paano nga ba um, na i-inherit ng isang individual yung mga characteristic traits ng kanyang parents. Okay? So, aside from that, tinitignan din natin dito kung paano nga ba nahawa or namamana ng isang individual yung sakit ng kanyang parents. Okay? Such as, halimbawa, the parent has color blindness or parent 1 has color blindness. So, with that, their daughter has, their son has color blindness as well. So, that is pedigree. Detect natin kung paano nga ba napapasa yung specific trait, specific syndrome, or specific disease all throughout the generations, such as the first generation, second generation, third generation. Okay? Next naman, so the information from a pedigree makes it possible to determine how many certain alleles are inherited. Okay? So, yun nga, we have alleles from the father and alleles from the mother. So, through the pedigree, malalaman natin kung paano nga ba na-inherit yung certain alleles na yun. Okay? So, whether it's an inheritance pattern that is dominant. Again, pag sinabi nating dominant, ibig sabihin, um, mas dominant tong allele na 'to over the other allele, okay? Mas nakikita or nagma-manifest dun sa mga offspring. And then next naman, we have here the recessive trait or the recessive inheritance wherein katulad nga ng sinabi natin sa dominant meron tayong natatabunan na isang allele. So, yun yung tatawag nating recessive wherein hindi siya madalas na nagma-manifest sa ating offspring. Okay? And then next naman, we have here autosomal or the sex link. Later on, we're gonna focus more of the autosomal recessive, autosomal dominant, and then sa sex link naman, we have uh, X-linked dominant, X-linked recessive, or di kaya Y-link. Okay? Commonly, yun yung pag-aaralan natin as we talk about pedigree. Okay? So, next naman, let's talk about different mode of diseases. Okay? So, here are the inheritance patterns. Okay? So, we have here number 1, autosomal dominant. Next is autosomal recessive. Next is X-linked dominant. Next is X-linked recessive. And lastly, we have here mitochondrial. So, sa mitochondrial, hindi na natin to kailangan masyadong pagpukusan kasi somehow additional information lang to dito. Okay? So, we have here the autosomal dominant and its characteristic would be each affected person usually has an affected parent. Occurs in every generation. So, meaning to say, ayun nga, in autosomal dominant, let's say for example, meron tayong specific disease, okay? So, sa specific disease na yun, always remember that yung isang affected person by the specific disease has an affected parent. It's either the affected one is the mother or the father or di kaya pwede rin namang both of the parents are affected and that's the reason why meron tayong affected child. Okay? So always remember that it occurs in every generation. Meaning to say, meron tayo ditong affected individual sa generation 1 or do sa lolo and lola. Generation 2, meron tayong affected do sa mother or father or sa nanay or tatay. Okay? Sa generation 3 naman, meron tayong affected do sa mga anak or sa mga offspring. Okay? So, that is autosomal dominant. Next naman, we have here the autosomal recessive. Autosomal recessive or in autosomal recessive, both parents of an affected persons are carriers, not typically seen in every generation. So in here, in autosomal recessive, there are instances na the parents are not affected, but still they are carriers of a certain disease. Since they are a carrier of a certain disease, although they are unaffected, still there is a high probability na magkaroon sila ng anak na affected individual. Okay? So, always remember that in autosomal recessive, hindi siya ganun, or hindi siya nakita in every generation. Okay? So, meaning to say, nagkakaroon tayo ng pag-skip ng generation. Let's say, for example, meron tayong affected individual in generation 1, wala tayong, or lahat ng nasa generation 2 would be unaffected, and then magmamanifest na lang ulit yung isang sakit or isang syndrome do sa ating generation 3. Okay? From generation 1, may affected. Generation 2, all of the child is unaffected. And then generation 3, the child will be affected. Or this generation, merong kahit isa or kahit dalawa na magiging affected child. Okay? So that is autosomal recessive. Okay, next naman, let's talk about the X-linked dominant. Okay? In X-linked dominant naman, females are more frequently affected because all daughters and no sons of an affected man will be affected. Okay? It can have affected males and females in same generation if the mother is affected. So, sa madaling sabi, 'pag ang affected would be the father, so ang may high probability lang na magkaroon ng specific na disease or syndrome would be the daughter, okay? And, um, the sons will be unaffected 'pag nanggaling yung sakit dun sa tatay. Pero 'pag nanggaling naman yung sakit dun sa nanay or the mother is the affected one, there are probability or there is a high probability na both of the son and the daughter will be affected one. Okay? So, kapag, again, pag tatay yung naging affected, ang naapektuhan lang would be the daughter. And then, pag nanay yung naging apektado ng specific na sakit or disease, ang maaaring maapektuhan would be the daughter and then the son. Okay? Next tayo. So, let's talk about the X-linked recessive. Males are more frequently affected. Okay? Affected males often present in each generation. So, in X-linked recessive naman, males are more frequently affected. Okay? So, kasi nga 'di ba, we all know naman na a male has one X chromosome. Although one lang yung X chromosome niya, may mataas pa rin na chance na magkaroon siya ng X-linked recessive trait. Kasi nga, still, meron pa rin siyang X chromosome. Okay? So, say for example, pag halimbawa mother will be the affected one, so most probably, ang mapapagpasahan niya ng specific na sakit or specific na syndrome would be the males or the son. Okay? So, next naman, let's have in here mitochondrial. Okay? Mitochondrial naman, this one is additional information naman since hindi naman to nasama do sa ating module. Okay? So, in mitochondrial, it can affect both males and females but only pass on by females because all mitochondria of all children come from the mother. Can appear in every generation. Okay, so yun nga, in mitochondrial, both of the son and then the daughter will be affected as long as the mother is affected. Kasi we all know naman that the mother is the source or dito nagagaling yung ating mitochondria. Okay? Sa ating mga mother. So with that, dahil nga sa mother nagagaling yung mitochondria, once na affected yung mother na specific na sakit, that is being transmitted through mitochondrial inheritance pattern. So with that, mataas ang tsansa na both of the daughter and then the son will be affected by the certain disease. Are we clear? Okay? So, remember din na in mitochondrial, nag-a-appear din siya in every generation. Generation 1, 2, and generation 3, and so on and so forth. So, basta sa buong generation, nag-a-appear tong kind of inheritance patterns na to. Okay? Next tayo. Are we clear na ba with this one? Okay? So, with that, let's talk about naman all about the autosomal dominant. Okay? So, ano nga ba pag sinabi nating autosomal dominant? So, in autosomal dominant, it does not skip generation. Affected parents can have unaffected child. Okay? So, we have here our pedigree in our Punnett square. Okay? So, with that, let's have a discussion in here. So, always remember na yung crosses or yung pedigree na nandito sa ating kaliwang side, basta meron kayo nakitang square, that is the side of the father. And the next naman, yung nandito sa kanan na side, that is the side of the mother. Okay? So, with that, meron tayo ditong pedigree, wherein meron tayong generation 1, generation 2, and generation 3. So, with that, magmumula yung pag-predict ng isang or pag-detect ng isang syndrome or disease to sa ating lolo and lola both sides. Okay? Yun nga, lolo and lola both sides, wherein we have here the side of the father. Okay? In the side of the father, makikita natin dito that lolo and lola is affected. On the side of the mother, we can see in here that lola is unaffected while lolo is the affected one. Okay, so with that, ano kaya yung magmamanifest do sa kanilang mga offspring? Okay? Do sa side ni father, lumabas dito, 'di ba, both of the parents are affected one, okay? Or affected individual. So with that, makikita nyo dito na ang naging offspring nila would be um two affected child, two, ayun nga, two affected child and one unaffected child, okay? So, makikita na agad natin dito yun, nandito sa ating definition, affected parents can have unaffected child. Wherein, paano nga ba natin or paano nga ba tayo nakakuha ng unaffected child although all of the parents are affected. So, nakakuha tayo ng unaffected child kasi nga makikita nyo dito na ang genotype ng ating parent number 1 or ng father would be heterozygous dominant, and then the parent number 2 or the mother is heterozygous dominant as well. Okay? Based on this Punnett square, as you can see in here, we have crossed heterozygous dominant age and heterozygous dominant age as well. So with that, the probability in having a child with that is affected would be 75%. Well, 25% naman will be the chance to have unaffected child. Okay? So that is the case on this one. Okay? Yun yung naging dahilan kung bakit yung tatay dito would be unaffected. Okay? Going back, next naman tayo. So again, affected lolo and lola, nagkaroon sila ng mga anak na 2 affected child and 1 unaffected child. Okay? So in probability, 75% will be the chance or the probability in having affected child, 25% will be the probability or the chance in having unaffected child. Okay? Next tayo, we're done na discussing all about our father side. Dito naman tayo sa ating mother side. So, sa mother side naman, as you can see in here, meron tayo ditong lola unaffected and lolo affected. So, with that, pag pinagsama natin ang lola and lolo na one is unaffected, so their offspring would be 50% affected, 50% unaffected. Okay? So, with that, ayun nga, meron na tayo ditong daughter that is unaffected and son that is affected. Okay? So, ito, this one or this daughter would be the mother. Okay? So, let this one be the mother, and then dito tayo sa ating father side, let this one the father. So, we have here a father that is unaffected and the mother that is unaffected. So, with that, since both of the parents are unaffected, so there is a high chance or high probability in having a 100% unaffected child. Okay? So, ayun nga, makikita nyo dito na it does not skip generation, not unless both of the parents will be unaffected. Okay? So, that is the case in autosomal dominant. Okay? Next tayo. So, always remember na maliit lang yung chance na magkaroon tayo ng unaffected individuals in autosomal dominant. Siyempre, nakadepende pa rin tayo doon sa ating genotype na binigay ng lolo and ng lola, which is the generation 1 or the first filial generation. Okay? So, next naman, we have here the example for the autosomal dominant. Okay? In autosomal dominant, we have here an example, namely the Huntington's disease. Okay? So, in Huntington's disease, always remember that it is a rare inherited disease that causes the progressive breakdown or the degeneration of nerve cells in the brain. Huntington's disease is a disease. Huntington disease has a broad impact on person's functional abilities and usually results in movement, thinking, and psychiatric disorders. Okay, here are the symptoms of Huntington's disease. We have here the involuntary jerking or breathing movements, and the next one, muscle problems such as rigidity or muscle contracture or what we call dystonia. And the next one we have here slow or abnormal eye movements. And the next one we have here impaired gait, posture and balance. And lastly we have here difficulty with speech or swallowing. Okay, so that is the symptoms of the Huntington's disease. Again, always remember that the Huntington's disease is a heritable disease that is rare. Okay, so meaning to say, pag sabi nating rare, sobrang kakaunti lang yung nagkakaroon ng specific na disease na to. Okay? So again, it is autosomal dominant, meaning to say, um, the reason why there is a Huntington's disease patient is that uh, maybe one of the parent would be affected as well. Okay? Next tayo. We have here, are we clear na ba with autosomal dominant? Okay, so next naman, we have here our autosomal recessive. So in autosomal recessive, it skips generation. Always remember that an affected parents can have affected child. Okay? So in here, makikita natin still would be the mother side naman and then the father side. So sa kaliwa, yung mother side, sa kanan would be the father side. Okay? And then next naman, so kung titingnan nyo dito, the mother side, somehow, hindi naman ganun karami yung naging affected sa kanila. So, what is the reason behind that? Okay, so, let's have an analyzation of this pedigree. So, in generation 1, the mother side, or in the mother side, father is, or the lolo is affected. Okay? Since the lolo is affected, so there is that's the reason why one of their child will be affected as well. And the probability of having unaffected child would be 75%. Okay? Kasi nga, this one is an autosomal recessive trait. Okay? Or autosomal recessive patterns of inheritance. Okay? Next tayo. So, yun nga. Check na natin dito. I'm sorry. So, dito pala sa ating mother side, although we have here affected father, still, the chance of having a child that is affected, hindi ko napansin, yung affected one pala dito would be the asawa of their son. Okay? So, with that, ayun nga, meron tayo dito one affected parent, which is the father, but still, the probability of having affected child is very low. And that's the reason why we have here 100% probability of having an affected child. Okay? So, always remember that in autosomal recessive, there are instances na although one parent is affected, still, 100% pa rin ang probability of having an affected child. Okay? So, next naman, let's talk naman all about dito sa ating father side. So, in the father side, as you can see in here, still, ganun pa rin, one of the parent is affected one, which is the mother. Okay? Since the lola is affected, as you can see in here, the son would be affected. And then, the other two child or the other two offspring will be unaffected. Okay? So, next tayo. Tingnan naman natin yung mga naging asawa dito. So, ulitin lang natin ha. In autosomal recessive, although one of the parents are affected, still, the probability of having affected child is very low. Okay, so mas mataas pa rin yung chance natin na magkaroon ng unaffected child since we are dealing all about autosomal recessive. And then dito naman sa case na to, still, ganun pa rin, one parent is affected and that's the reason why merong isang affected child or may nagmanifest na affected child. Okay? So, in terms of probability, so we have here, sa first generation, 50% will be the probability of having affected. Second generation, there is 100% probability of having unaffected child. Okay? Next naman, dito sa ating father side, okay, again, sa ating first generation, there is 50% having affected individual. The next naman, dito sa ating second generation, there is 75% having or probability of having unaffected child and 25% having affected child. Okay? So, next naman, tingnan naman natin yung mga naging asa-asawa nila. Okay? So, dito sa ating mother side, bali ang tito, nakapangasawa ng tita na affected. So, ano nga ba nangyari do sa mga anak ni tito and ni tita? Okay, so anong nangyari dun sa anak ni tito and ni tita? So, since tita is affected, and that's the reason why one of their child is affected, which is the son. Okay? Next naman, we have here another set up mag-asawa. Okay? So, let this one, yung nasa middle, be the mother and then the father. Okay? So, this one is the mother, which is unaffected, and then the father is unaffected as well. Okay? So, although both of the parents is unaffected, still, they are carriers of a certain disease. Dahil nga they are carriers of a certain disease, still, there is a high or there is a high probability of having affected child. Okay, so in here, nakikita nyo naman na we have here unaffected parents can have affected child. Okay, so napakita na nga yan dito sa pangalawang set ng mag-asawa natin, which is the mother and the father. So, in here, meron tayong mother unaffected, father unaffected, and then meron tayong two child unaffected, one child affected. Okay, so again, for the probability, 75% will be the probability of having unaffected child and 25% will be the probability of having affected child. Okay, so again, kaya nagkaroon tayo ng affected child dito is because both of the parents are the carriers of disease. Okay? Next naman, check na ulit natin to another set of mag-asawa. Again, this one is tito and tita. Okay? Tito number 2 is affected. Tita number 2 is affected. Okay? Since both of the parents are affected, so that the probability or the chance of having affected child would be 100%. Okay? So that is the pedigree for the autosomal recessive. Always remember that it skips generation, meaning to say, there are instance na magmanifest lang siya sa generation 1, next naman magmamanifest sa generation 2, hindi siya magma-manifest sa generation 2 rather, and then magma-manifest na lang ulit sa generation 3. Nag-i-skip siya. Halimbawa, meron sa generation 1, tapos mawawalan sa generation 2, magkakaroon ulit sa generation 3, tapos sa generation 4, mawawalan ulit. Okay, so that is autosomal recessive. Aside from that, again, unaffected parents can have affected child. Again, what is the reason behind that? Unaffected parents can have affected child because unaffected parents still are the carriers of a certain disease. Okay? So, for the genotype naman, homozygous FF and heterozygous FF would be the genotype of unaffected individuals. Small letter FF or the homozygous recessive FF would be the genotype of affected individuals. Okay? Are we clear na ba with autosomal recessive? Okay, next tayo. We have here an example for the autosomal recessive. So this one is what we call the sickle cell. Okay? Sickle cell. Ano nga ba pag sinabi nating sickle cell? Sickle cell disease is a disorder that affects the red blood cells caused by one mutation. Okay? It is the most common genetic disorder diagnosed worldwide. The patient's red blood cells are crescent moon shape instead of a normal dish shape, and they are also less flexible, which can cause blockages uh, throughout the blood vessels, resulting in episode of pain. Patients have weaker immune system, and the disease can affect other organs such as the heart, lungs, kidneys, liver. Okay, so some of the patients are at higher risk of infection, stroke, and pneumonia. Okay, so aside from that, commonly yung mga tao na or yung mga sickle cell patient natin, nagkakaroon din sila ng mga bone infection. So, mapapansin niyo naman based rin dun sa mga sinabi kong, ah, yung effects ng sickle cell such as having diseases in the heart, in the lungs, kidneys, or liver, as well as different infection, stroke, pneumonia, meningitis, and bone infection. Mapapansin niyo na sobrang daming naging epekto do sa isang individual kahit na nagkaroon lang tayo ng kakaunting modifications or mutations do sa ating hemoglobin. So, dito kasi, instead of having the hemoglobin with this shape, so nagkaroon tayo ng crescent shape hemoglobin. Okay? So, although the mutation or the modification only happens do sa shape na ating hemoglobin, still, the effects or the diseases or this syndrome will have a massive effect on an individual or our sickle cell patients. Okay? So, yun nga, katulad nga ng sinabi ko sa inyo kanina, although, isang or sobrang liit na mutation lang yung mayayari doon sa ating, halimbawa sa hemoglobin or di kaya sa ating chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome hanggang 22 or hanggang 23, still, there is a chance na magkaroon ng pagbabago sa isang individual. Okay? So, pagbabago such as having uh, learning disabilities or di kaya pagbabago sa physical appearance or pagbabago do sa different organs. Okay? So, ganun yung nangyayari kasi kapag pag-usapan natin yung mutation. So, in mutation, kahit sobrang liit lang ng changes na nagaganap or halimbawa, nagkaroon na ng pagbabago sa shape, pagbabago sa color, still, yung mga pagbabago na yan or mutation na yan will have a great impact on the patients having the said mutation. Okay? So, that is, again, sickle cell anemia. Okay? So, aside from that pala, in autosomal recessive, meron pa tayong ibang example which is the cystic fibrosis. Okay? Again, we have here the example na sickle cell anemia and then the cystic fibrosis. So, in autosomal recessive, always remember na there are still a chance of having affected child although the parents are unaffected. As long as the parents are carriers, still there is a chance of having affected child. Okay? Are we clear na ba with this one? Okay, next naman tayo. So, let's talk about the X-linked dominant. Okay, so ano nga ba kapag sinabi nating X-linked dominant? Okay, so in X-linked dominant naman, all daughters of affected father are affected. mother tends to pass their disease to their son. So, sa madaling sabi, in X-linked dominant, kapag ang father would be the affected one, so most probably the daughter will be the affected individual. Okay? So, ulitin natin, kapag ang father would be the affected one or the affected of a certain disease, ang maaaring maka-inherit ng sakit niya would be the daughter. Okay? And then next naman, for the mothers naman, pag halimbawa naman sila ang carriers ng specific disease, may papasa nila yung specific na sakit doon sa kanilang mga anak na lalaki or doon sa kanilang mga son. Okay? So with that, let's have an analysis of this pedigree. So as you can see in here, in first filial generation or yung generation ni lolo and ni lola, lolo is unaffected while lola is affected one. Okay? Dahil nga si lola ang naapektuhan ng specific na sakit, that's the reason why lola has transmitted the specific disease or the certain disease to her daughter and to her son. Okay? So, ulitin lang natin. Kapag mother ang carrier ng kapag mother ang affected ng certain disease na to, malaki ang tsansa na both of the daughter and then the son will be affected individual. Okay? And then next naman, so yun nga, meron tayo ditong lolo unaffected, lola affected, and then next naman, doon sa kanila mga offspring, meron tayo ditong sige, let this one be the tita. So, meron tayo ditong tita affected, and then tita unaffected, tito unaffected, and then next naman, meron tayo ditong father, or let this one be your father. So, this one is father affected, and then next naman, tatay affected, and then nanay unaffected. Itilan natin. So, dito muna tayo sa ating first child. Okay? So, the first child is affected daughter. Second child is unaffected daughter. Third child is unaffected son. And fourth child is affected son. Okay? So, yun nga. Check na natin. So, as you can see in here, kapag meron tayong one parent that is affected, which is the mother, there is a probability or a high chance of having a child or having a daughter and a son that is affected. So, we have here 50% probability of having affected child, 50% would be the probability of having an affected child. Okay? So, next naman tayo. So, dahil nga mother is the carrier, the affected one of the said or the certain disease. So, that's the reason why na-transmit niya yung sakit na yun both sa kanyang daughter and sa kanyang son. Okay? Next naman tayo. So, check naman natin kung sino yung napangasawa ni tita. Okay? So, dito, si tita will be affected and tito will be unaffected. Okay? So, dahil meron tayong mother that is affected, so with that, ang kanila magiging offspring, ganun pa rin, 50% will be the probability of having affected child and 50% will be the probability of having an affected child. Okay? So we have here 4 offsprings. Child number 1 is affected daughter. Child number 2 is unaffected son. Child number 3 is unaffected daughter. And child number 4 will be affected son. Okay? So, nakukuha ba yung punto natin dito sa X-linked dominant? Kapag nanay ang affected ng certain disease, matatransmit niya ang kanyang sakit doon sa kanyang daughter and sa son. And then next naman, dito naman, check naman natin. So, this one is the tatay. Okay? So, As you can see in here, the tatay has or the tatay is the affected one while the nanay is unaffected one. Okay? So dahil nga tatay yung affected dito, so the probability of having affected daughter will be 100%. Kasi nga nanggaling yung sakit do sa ating tatay. Okay? So in here we have child number 1 is affected, or this one is the affected daughter. Child number 2 is unaffected son. Child number 3 is affected daughter. And child number 4 is unaffected son. Okay? So, sa madaling sabi, kapag tatay naman ang naapektuhan ng specific na sakit, meaning to say, may papasa niya lang yung sakit na to doon sa kanyang mga anak na babae. At yung mga anak na lalaki will be unaffected. Okay? So with that, we have here different alleles being used. Okay? So we have here different genotypes din. Okay? Pag small letter D or yung tatawag natin homozygous recessive D, that is unaffected. And the next naman, capital letter D, that is homozygous dominant, meaning to say that is affected. And then next naman, unaffected pa rin kapag meron tayong small letter D. Okay? For the males. Okay? Next naman tayo. For the females naman, masasabi nating affected kapag meron tayong homozygous dominant letter D. Ayan. And then, affected pa rin kahit na heterozygous dominant yung kanyang genotype. Okay? Next tayo. So, always remember na magkaiba ang gagamitin nating set of chromosomes sa female and sa male. Pag sa female, gagamit tayo ng 2X chromosome. Pag male naman, gagamit tayo ng X and Y chromosome. Okay? Later on, I'll give you the copy of different genotypes, or I'll be discussing different genotypes para hindi kayo malilito kung ano nga ba yung dapat gamitin na mga genotype. Okay? So with that, we have here an example of X-linked dominant. So this one is Fragile X syndrome. Okay? So in Fragile X syndrome, so as you can see in here, dito sa ating image, the child has large ear and large forehead. So aside from that, having large ear and large forehead, still, this child has intellectual disability. Okay? So next naman, we have here the definition for the term or the for the Fragile X syndrome. Okay? Fragile X syndrome is a genetic condition that causes a range of developmental problems including learning disabilities and cognitive impairment. Usually, males are more severely affected by this disorder than females. Affected individuals usually have delayed development of speech and language by the age of 2. Okay? So, yun nga, most probably in Fragile X syndrome, although we all know naman na in males, isa lang yung kanilang X chromosome, still, malaki yung nagiging impact sa kanila pag halimbawa nagkaroon sila ng Fragile X syndrome. Kasi parang mas dominant over the males. Okay? So, etong syndrome na to. Okay? So ano nga ba pag sabi nating Fragile X syndrome? Most probably nagkakaroon ng mga learning disability and cognitive impairment ang patients with Fragile X syndrome. Okay? Next naman, we have here, nagkakaroon din tayo ng mga delayed in speech development or the development of speech and language. Okay, so ibig sabihin, nagkakaroon talaga ng delay do sa pagsasalita or di kaya halimbawa, pagkakaroon ng delay do sa pagkatuto na isang bata. Halimbawa, 17 years old na tong Fragile X syndrome patient natin, but still hindi pa rin siya marunong magbasa or hindi pa rin siya marunong magsulat. Okay, so that is Fragile X syndrome. Okay? Kapag merong delay in the cognitive cognitive state or cognitive ability ng isang individual. Okay? Commonly, meron pa tayong iba pang example for the X-linked dominant. We have here the vitamin D resistant rickets. Okay? Always remember lang na in X-linked dominant, always remember na nanggagaling ang sakit sa mother. Okay? Nanggagaling ang sakit sa mother. And that's the reason why natatransmit siya kay son. Okay? So, yung dahilan kung bakit tayo yung nagkaroon ng Fragile X syndrome is that the mother most probably is affected with Fragile X syndrome. Okay? Kasi kapag halimbawa father will be the affected one, hindi tayo magkakaroon ng son that has Fragile X syndrome. But as you can see in here, dahil nga meron tayong male affected with Fragile X syndrome, most probably, the affected one will be the mother. Okay? So, next tayo. So, let's talk about naman the X-linked recessive. So, ano nga ba pag sinabi nating X-linked recessive? So, in X-linked recessive, all sons of affected mother are affected. An affected father will never have an affected daughters even if the mother is affected. Okay, so that is X-linked recessive naman. Okay, so dito naman, makikita nyo sa ating pedigree, we have here generation 1, generation 2, and generation 3. So, in generation 1, we have here the lola that is affected and the lolo unaffected. Ano ba nangyari doon sa ating generation 2 or doon sa kanilang mga offspring? So, we have here child number 1 or the daughter number 1 is unaffected. Son number 1 is affected. Daughter daughter number 2 is unaffected and son number 2 is affected. So as you can see in here, katulad nga ng sinabi natin dito, all sons of affected mother are affected. Since lola is affected, so with that, the probability of having affected son will be 100%. Okay? Siyempre, kung mapapansin nyo naman dito, we have here the unaffected father. Since we have here the unaffected father, so with that, the probability of having affected daughters will be 100%. I mean 0%. Okay? So, wala tayong maapektuhan na daughter kahit na ang parent or kahit na ang mother will be the affected one. Okay? So, ang maapektuhan lang ng specific na sakit na to will be the son. Okay? So, with that, ayun nga, probability speaking, so we have here 50% unaffected, 50% affected child, wherein the affected one is the males and then the unaffected one is the females. Okay? That is the X-linked. So, check naman natin kung ano yung nangyari doon sa ating mga naging asawa ni tito or ni tita rather. So, ito, nagkaroon ng asawa si tita or si child number 1. Nagkaroon din ng asawa si child number 4. So, let child number 4 be the father. Okay? So, with that, ayun nga, meron tayo ditong pedigree between tita and then si tito. So, as you can see in here, tita or the child number 1 is unaffected. And then next naman, tito is unaffected as well. Okay? So, although we have here parents that is both unaffected, still, always remember that the child number 1 or tita is still a carrier of certain disease. Okay? Carrier pa rin siya kasi nga naggaling yung sakit na to sa kanyang mother. Although they are unaffected, still, they are the carriers of a specific disease. Okay? So, ayun nga, makikita nyo dito, tita is unaffected, tito is unaffected as well, but their offspring would be, one will be affected. Okay? Or the son or the child number 1 is the affected one. Okay? So, bakit nga ba tayo nagkaroon dito ng affected one? Kahit na ang mga parents is unaffected one. So, nagkaroon tayo ng affected child in here, which is the child number 1 or the son number 1 is because, again, mother is the carrier of the disease. Kapag meron tayong carrier, there are still chance or kahit small probability of having affected child. Okay? Next naman, we have here, ayun nga, meron tayo ditong child number 4. So again, let child number 4 be the tatay. Okay, so we have here tatay that is affected and nanay that is affected as well. Okay, so both of the parents are affected and that's the reason why there is a chance of having 100% probability uh yun nga, 100% will be the probability of having affected child. Okay, we're in child number 1 or the son number 1 is affected, daughter number 1 is affected, and then son number 2 or the child number 3 is still affected. Okay, again, the probability would be 100% kasi nga both of the parents are affected one. Okay? So, next naman, that is X-linked recessive, okay? Wherein all sons of affected mother are affected, okay? And then, unaffected father will never have an affected daughter even if the mother is affected. Pero dito sa case natin kasi, kaya nagkaroon tayo ng 100% probability of having affected is it is that because meron tayong affected father. Okay, sinasabi lang naman dito, unaffected father will never have an affected daughter. Okay? So, dahil nga meron tayong affected father and that's the reason why nagkaroon tayo ng 100% probability of having affected child. Okay? So, that is X-linked recessive. Okay? Next tayo. Nakuha ba yung punto natin do sa different modes of or patterns of inheritance or modes of diseases? Okay? Naintindihan na yung autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, X-linked dominant, and X-linked recessive. Okay na ba tayo doon? Okay. So with that, ayun nga, meron tayo dito example na X-linked recessive, which is the color blindness. Okay? So in color blindness, as you can see in here, nag-iiba yung tingin nila sa color green and color red. In some instances, nag-iiba rin yung tingin nila sa color blue. Okay? So, ano kaya yung reason behind that? Okay? So, color blindness, by definition kasi, occurs when you are unable to see colors in a normal way. It is also known as color deficiency. Color blindness often happens when someone cannot distinguish between certain colors, okay? Between certain colors. This usually happens between greens and reds and occasionally blues. Katulad nga ng sinabi ko sa inyo kanina, so masasabi natin na ang individual has color blindness kapag hindi niya clearly nakikita yung color green, yung color red, at color blue. That is color blindness. Okay? So that is X-linked recessive example. Okay? Wherein always remember na kapag mother ang affected, ang naapektuhan will be the son. And then pag unaffected naman yung father, syempre magkakaroon din tayo or hindi rin tayo magkakaroon ng affected daughters, okay? So most probably, color blindness is more dominant in males as compared in females, okay? So that is X-linked recessive example, which is the color blindness. Next naman tayo, we have here the Y-linked. Okay, so in Y-linked naman, all males are affected or all males in generation 1, generation 2, generation 3 are affected. Okay, so as you can see in here, we have here the generation 1. So lolo is affected. Since lolo is affected, so the offspring will be 50% affected, 50% unaffected, wherein 100% of having affected sons and 100% of having unaffected daughter. Okay, always remember, in Y-link, ang naapektuhan lang sa bawat generation will be the males. Okay? So, next naman, we have here, ayan nga, generation 1, affected lolo, generation 2, affected tito and affected tatay, generation 3, affected pinsan number 1 na lalaki, pinsan number 2 na lalaki, and then next naman, dito naman sa side na 'to, as you can see in here, we have here the affected tita, I mean the unaffected tita and the unaffected tito. Since unaffected ang both parents, that's the reason why kahit lalaki yung anak nila, they will be unaffected since father is unaffected. Okay? Next naman tayo, another set na mag-asawa tayo. So, this one is the tatay and the nanay. So, tatay is affected while nanay is unaffected. So, dahil nga one of the parent is affected, which is the tatay, and that's the reason why the son will be affected as well. Okay? Always remember na laging nanggagaling yung Y-link natin or Y-link diseases doon sa ating males, okay? It's either lolo man yan, tatay, or di kaya yung mga anak na lalaki. So, doon nagmamanifest yung Y-link diseases or Y-link syndromes natin. Okay? Next tayo. So, we have here an example for the Y-link. Okay? So, this one is hypertrichosis pinae auris. Okay? So, ano nga ba itong hypertrichosis pinae auris na to? Okay? So, in here, as you can see, Y-link traits never occur in females and occur only in male or in all male descendants of an affected male. Okay? So, when we say descendants, yun yung mga sumusunod pang mga generation. Okay? So, the concept of dominant and recessive do not apply to Y-link traits, okay? As only one allele on the Y is ever present in one male individual. Okay, so yun nga, wala tayong tinatawag dito na dominant and recessive trait. Bakit nga ba walang dominant and recessive trait? It is because alam naman natin na isa lang yung Y chromosome ng isang male individual. That is the reason behind that. Okay? So, next naman, meron pa tayong other examples. Ayun nga, aside from hypertrichosis pinae auris, pwede rin natin masabi na Y-link mode of transmission or mode of inheritance yung Y chromosome infertility. Okay? Are we clear na ba with this one? Next na tayo. To sum it up, here are the genotypes that we need to use in order to know more about different diseases, okay? Or different modes of diseases. So again, we have the modes of diseases na autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, X-linked dominant, and then the X-linked recessive. Okay? So for the genotypes, as you can see in here, we have here the affected and unaffected individual. Okay? So ano nga bang gagamitin natin kapag affected? Ano nga ba gagamitin natin pag unaffected? So in autosomal dominant, ang gagamitin natin would be homozygous dominant, heterozygous dominant, FF. Okay? And then for the unaffected one, we're gonna be using homozygous FF. For the autosomal recessive naman, we're gonna be using, for the affected one, is homozygous recessive FF. And then, for the autosomal recessive unaffected, we have here the homozygous dominant FF and heterozygous dominant FF. For the X-linked dominant naman, so since this one is an X-linked trait, so we're gonna be using in here, or sex-linked trait, we're gonna be using in here X and Y chromosomes. Okay? So, in here, in X-linked dominant, the affected individuals will be having capital letter B in males. Okay? So, syempre, dun lang natin to ilalagay sa X chromosomes. Okay? So, we have here capital letter B in males. And then, in females, we have here capital BB, or what we call the homozygous dominant trait, okay? Homozygous dominant BB. And then next naman, another one will be heterozygous dominant BB. Okay? Next naman, for the unaffected individual naman, in males, we have here small letter B being attached to sa ating X chromosome or X genotype. Okay? Aside from that, for females naman, most probably in X-linked dominant, the unaffected individuals will be having a genotype that is homozygous recessive. Okay? For X-linked recessive naman, we have here um, small letter B for the males, and then small letter B rin for the females, or what we call the homozygous recessive trait. Okay? Next naman, for the unaffected individuals naman, so ayun nga, for male unaffected in X-linked recessive, we're gonna be using capital letter B that is being adhered in X chromosome. Okay, next naman, for unaffected females naman, meron tayo two sets of genotypes. We have here homozygous dominant and then heterozygous dominant. Okay, heterozygous dominant BB. Okay, so with that, that is a summary or the genotypes that we're gonna be using for the different modes of diseases, which is the autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, X-linked dominant, X-linked recessive, and then syempre meron din tayong affected individuals and unaffected individuals. Okay, so that is the summary. Next tayo. So let's talk about our activity. Okay, so in our activity, we have here a question. So a situation, one woman wants to have a child but is afraid of having a child with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Okay, Duchenne muscular dystrophy is an X-linked recessive disease. Okay, so with that, one of her siblings died of the said disease, but her husband does not have the disease and has no history of muscular dystrophy in his family. Okay, so all you need to do is to answer the following questions. Okay, so yun nga, makikita natin dito na meron daw tayong mother that is a carrier of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Natatakot siya magkaroon ng anak. Bakit nga ba siya natatakot magkaroon ng anak? Natatakot siya magkaroon ng anak na merong muscular dystrophy kasi nga isa na sa mga kapatid niya ang namatay dahil sa Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Okay, so ayun nga, itong female carrier na to, syempre she is unaffected kasi nga, just like what I said, carrier lang siya ng Duchenne muscular dystrophy na sakit. Okay, so yun nga, nagkaroon daw siya ng husband na unaffected din ng Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Ang kaibahan nito, yung husband niya, wala silang history ng Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Okay? Pero yung babae, katulad nga ng sinabi ko kanina, naging siyang carrier na disease kasi nga it runs in their blood. Okay? So, makikita natin dito na one of her siblings has the Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Okay? Most probably, their parents or one of their parents maybe are carriers or affected of the muscular dystrophy. Okay? So with that, ayun nga, here are the questions that you need to answer. Letter A, what is the genotype of the women? Okay? So ano nga bang gagamitin natin sa genotype? So ito lang ang gagamitin natin. So siguro letter D na lang. Represent na lang natin yung muscular dystrophy as letter D. So ito ang mga gagamitin. So since we are talking all about X-linked recessive, we're gonna be using, for the affected is small letter B for the males, and for the females naman we have here homozygous recessive. Okay? Homozygous recessive, letter D naman siya. Okay? Next naman, for the unaffected individuals, for males, we're gonna be using capital letter B. For females naman, we're gonna be using homozygous dominant letter D. And then next naman, heterozygous dominant letter D. Okay? Next tayo. So, we have here, ayan nga, the question. Yun yung gagamitin yung mga genotype. Okay? So, genotype, all you need to do is identify the genotype of the mother or genotype of the women. Letter B, the genotype of the father. Okay? Pakisulat na lang din. Letter C, what are the probability that a woman and her husband will have a child with muscular dystrophy? So, in percentage, halimbawa, pwede nyong gamitin dito would be 0%, 25%, 75%, and 50% or 100% will be the probability of the woman and husband to have, or the mother and the father in having affected child or a child with muscular dystrophy. Okay? Ulitin lang natin. Letter A is the genotype of the mother. Letter B is the genotype of the father. Letter C is the probability of having affected child or a child with muscular dystrophy. It should be in percentage. 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%. Yun lang yung pagpipilian nyo doon. Okay? Letter D naman, if ever the disease will be transmitted to one of their future children, what will be the gender of the child? Okay, so dito naman, syempre ang ilalagay nyo lang is either male, female, or di kaya pwede ring ilagay yung daughter and son. Okay, most probably, pag nilagay ang female and male, ilalagay din dapat yung daughter and son. Okay, so what will be the gender of the child? Okay, letter E naman, what is the probability that the woman and her husband will have a normal daughter? O yung tinatawag natin na unaffected female child. Okay, so ano nga ba yung probability na magkakaroon sila ng normal daughter? Which is a daughter that has no muscular dystrophy, but there's a chance that this daughter can be a carrier of muscular dystrophy. Okay? So, ilan nga ba maging probability? So, we have here 0%. So, with that, ayun nga, meron tayo ditong isasagot na sa letter E, 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%. Letter F naman, can the female never get a sex-linked trait? Explain your answer. So this question will be answerable by yes or no. Okay? So yes, female can never get a sex-linked trait. Okay? On the other hand, it can also be answered by no. No, female will have a chance in getting a sex-linked trait. Okay? So all you need to do is to explain your answer right after answering it by yes or no. Okay? So that is activity part 1. Okay? So let's have in here activity number 2. Okay? So all you need to do is to identify the mode of disease shown in the identify the mode of disease shown in the pedigree and write the genotype of each member. Okay? All you need to do is to use letter A. Okay? So, in here, meron tayo iba't ibang example dito, which is the autosomal dominant, and this one is the X-linked dominant. Okay? So, all you need to do is to analyze the pedigree and then write down the genotype of each member, and then gagamitin nyo yung genotype na letter A. So, pag autosomal dominant, syempre yung letter A lang yung gagamitin nyo. And then for X-linked dominant naman, ang gagamitin nyo would be, syempre lalagyan nyo siya ng letter X kasi nga this is a sex-linked or X-linked trait. Okay? So, gagamit kayo ng letter X and then ng letter A for the X-linked dominant. And for the autosomal dominant, ang gagamitin lang would be letter A. Okay? So again, dito sa pedigree na to, i-a-analyze niyo lang siya, iche-check niyo kung paano nangyari yung inheritance patterns. Siyempre gagamit din kayo ng Punnett square para malaman kung ano nga ba ang nangyayari or paano nga ba nata-transmit yung isang sakit or yung isang genotype or paano nga ba nata-transmit yung allele ng parents dun sa kanyang mga offspring. Okay, so yun yung gagawin nyo for the activity number 2. Okay, so are we clear na ba with this one? Activity number 1, activity number 2 for the written works. Okay, next naman tayo. We have here our performance task. Okay, so in performance task, all you need to do is to make your own pedigree. Okay, so you need to include the following. First generation, ayun nga, lolo and lola, both of the mother side and father side. Second generation will be your mother's and father's siblings, which is tito and tita both sides. Okay? Pati na rin syempre yung mother and father nyo, kailangan nyo include dito. And then third generation will be you and your sibling. Okay? Pag halimbawa, isang anak ka lang, syempre wala ka ilalagay na sibling. Okay? Next naman tayo, we have here mother side. Father side and mother side. Ayun nga, we have here the grandparents. Ganito yung itsura niya. Your father and his siblings. So, yung tatawag natin tito and tita. Okay? Your mother and her sibling. Tito and tita dun sa ating mother side. And then next naman sa third generation, you and your sibling. Okay? So, if ever na 5 kayo magkakapatid, ilagay dyan. Okay? So, syempre wag din kakalimutan na maglagay ng legends. Okay? Halimbawa, for the tall height, ang gagamitin mo will be straight line. Short height, you're going to use broken lines. Okay? For the straight hair, you're gonna be using violet. Okay? For the curly hair, you're gonna be using color pink. Okay? So, lagi yung tatandaan na maglalagay ng legends para pag halimbawa mag-check na ako na activity nyo, hindi ako mahirapan sa pag-check. Next is, use the symbol circle for female members and square for male members of your family. Okay? So, ayun nga, lagi na lang natin tatandaan yung symbol na to. Pag circle, that is female. For square, that is male. Circle, shaded is affected female. Square, shaded is affected male. Okay? So, aside from that, meron pa tayong iba't ibang mga symbol. Check nyo na lang doon sa previous slide. Okay? So, for the example, ito yung mga ilalagay nyo dito sa inyong pedigree. So, all you need to do is to trace 2 observable traits and put a legend. Okay? So, ano nga ba yung mga observable trait na pwede nating include? We have here the hair type, the height, the eye color, the shape of the nose, the color of the hair. Okay? So, that is different observable traits na maaari nating ilagay dito sa ating performance task. Okay? So, example nga natin, hair type is curly, pink dot. Straight hair is violet dot. Height is for the tall, full outline or straight line. For the short naman, we have here the broken outline. Okay, so be creative in making your pedigree. It can be digital or it can be digitally made. You can put pictures of your family members for additional point. Okay? Most probably, so ito nga, mas maganda kung gagawin nyo siya traditionally rather than digitally. Kasi pag halimbawa digital nyo siya ginawa, there are instance na magkaroon ng pagbabago do sa mga elements, magkakaroon ng adjustments kapag naipasa nyo na. So, mas ma-appreciate ko rin kasi pag traditional yung gawa nyo kasi at least parang mas pinaghirapan as compared kay digital na readily made na yung mga elements. Okay? So, with that, ayun nga, much better kung traditional type of art yung gagamitin nyo. And then, syempre, make sure to put the pictures of your family members for additional points. Ayun, para medyo mataas-taas yung makuha points. Maglagay ng pictures. Okay? So, hindi naman necessarily mean na gugupitin nyo yung mga pictures. Pwede namang, halimbawa, picturean nyo yung isang picture or yung printed picture. And then, ilagay nyo sa Word. Tapos gawin nyo na lang siyang, ayun nga, gupit-gupitin nyo na lang siya. Okay? So, ganun na lang yung gagawin sa performance task. Okay? So, ayun nga. I'll be sending na rin yung example na ginawa namin back when we were in third year college para at least ma-visualize nyo na rin kung ano itsura ng pedigree. Okay? So, if ever naman na, di ba, ang ating deadline for this activity is February 28. If ever na hindi kayang ipasa sa February 28, so I'll be giving extensions naman. Okay? So, syempre, president nyo na lang yung makikipag-coordinate sa akin. Okay? So, make sure na makipag-coordinate sa akin ahead of time para at least makakapag-decision din ako right away. Okay? So, with that, do you still have questions, clarification, violent reaction about the instructions, all about our topic? If none, so here are the references for today's discussion, and that's the end of our discussion. So that's all for today. Thank you for listening. Let's call a day. Goodbye, class.